Hello there, folks. My name is Spoonks, and welcome back to another episode of Box Office Chat. This is the show where I break down the top 5 domestic box office results, see where each movie landed, and see how well each movie did. So let's get started. Number 5 was Bad Boys Ride or Die, making $6.6 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of $177 million and a worldwide total of $360 million. Bad Boys still sticking around. While it didn't get like a boost or an increase or anything, it still managed to hold well. I think larger part due to the 4th of July holiday, the fact that this is one of the few action movies out right now definitely helped it out. One of the few comedies as well also definitely helped it out. People are still going out to see this movie. It had a really solid hold from last weekend, just dropping 36%, which is really impressive. It is now a little over 20 million away from surpassing the $200 million milestone domestically. I think it's going to be able to cross that milestone slowly but surely. It is also 40 million away from surpassing the $400 million milestone, which is not only the quadrupling point of its $100 million budget, but given how close it is to that milestone, I think it will be able to do that slowly but surely. Yeah, just another solid weekend for this movie. It keeps on chugging along. I think it's going to continue to chug along outside of the top 5. This has just been a really solid, very impressive run for Bad Boys Ride or Die. It definitely gave the box office a much needed boost. Certainly the summer, it really pretty much kicked off the summer movie season and helped us see a lot of other movies really overperform and just, the box office get us to where we need to. Yeah, I don't think a lot of movies give this movie credit where it's due in that regard, and the fact that it's just done so well thus far is just says a lot about the movie, says a lot about the fan base and this franchise. People still want to go check these movies out. People still want to see Will Smith and Martin Lawrence together. And yeah, just a fantastic performance for this movie, and it's still going to keep going. So yeah, overall, another solid weekend for another solid performance for Bad Boys Ride or Die. Number 4 was Maxine, opening with $6.7 million this weekend domestically and $7.8 million worldwide. Didn't have a lot of high expectations for this movie, as evident by the fact that I didn't really talk about this movie last week. I didn't think it would flop by any means. This is actually the biggest opening in the X franchise by Ty West, and what that is actually very impressive. It's also very impressive that this movie was able to crack the top 5 overall, make an impact. Yeah, and I'm sure, given that this wasn't a very cheap expensive movie to make, I'm not sure what the budget was, but I can't imagine it was that much. I'm sure this movie's going to be able to make its budget back, and it was one of the more well-received horror films of the year. It got a B Cinema Score rating, which is actually better than most of the horror films that was released this year. This was still, it didn't make as much of an impact that I think a lot of other people were expecting it to, because it did have a pretty decent marketing campaign. I will say I did see a lot of ads for this stuff, and it certainly had some buzz, from some of the die-hard horror and X fans online for sure. So I think there was some hope that this movie may be able to crack some double digits. Obviously, also 4th of July also helping out, but it just wasn't able to make that mark. This X franchise isn't quite as big as stuff like, Scream or Your Quiet Places. It isn't as widely known. It has its own little niche fan base, so it didn't really meet those expectations. But this is still, like I said, a very solid performance, even if it didn't reach the heights of some bigger horror films. Given the fact that this is the biggest opening of the franchise, is quite impressive, and I'm curious to see if this movie will be able to leg out and do well throughout the rest of its theatrical run. Very curious to see how far it goes from here, but yeah, still a pretty solid opening. Not much else to say here except, pretty impressive. Number 3 was A Quiet Place Day 1, making $20 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of $93 million and a worldwide total of $177 million. So as I briefly mentioned last week, when it comes to these horror films that open a lot better than expected, they tend to be very front-loaded and have steep drops. Scream 6 had a great open but had a significant drop. Five Nights at Freddy's last year had a huge opening but then dropped significantly, and the same thing happened here. This film dropped 61%, which was pretty much expected. This film, horror films, especially big event horror films, part of big franchises like this, tend to have very big opening weekends, but they also tend to be very front loaded, which causes the second weekends to drop significantly. But this is still a very solid performance. Don't get me wrong, this is still a great result for the film. It's 7 million away from surpassing 100 million domestically, and it's just a little over 20 million away from surpassing $200 million worldwide. And not only that, but it's also doubled its $67 million budget. This movie's in the right place. It's not in any trouble. It just had a very big drop off, which was expected, but it was still a big drop off. And it could have been a lot worse for this movie. It could have dropped near 70%. And given that there was a lot of family movies out this weekend, chances were that this movie wasn't gonna put up a good fight, the best fight against those movies. But yeah, still being able to make at least 20 million this weekend is quite impressive. Nonetheless, it's still the biggest horror film of the year. It's going to be interesting to see what challenges this by the end of the year. Maybe some of the other horror franchises, Smile or Alien, Romulus. It's going to be interesting, but I think this movie is going to hold the crown for a little while longer. This movie's still showing signs of good word of mouth from audiences and good legs. Even with the drop off, like I've said multiple times before, it was expected for a horror movie like this. So yeah, another solid weekend for Quiet Place. Day one, I'm sure it's going to be able to bounce back from this. It's the major horror film. It's still going to be able to stand out from the rest of the big summer blockbusters coming out soon. So yeah, another solid weekend for this movie for sure. Number 2 was, funny enough, Inside Out 2, making $30 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of $534 million and a worldwide total of $1.2 billion. So while it faced off its biggest competitor this weekend and lost the number 1 spot after 3 weekends, the movie is still going strong and only dropped 47%, which is really impressive when you consider the new competition, the new animated movie in town right now. The fact that this movie was able to still have a hold under 50% is quite impressive, and it was able to surpass some milestones. On the domestic side, not only is it now the 3rd biggest animated film of all time, surpassing both Finding Dory and Frozen 2, it is also the 3rd animated film ever domestically to surpass $500 million. It sits behind the Super Mario Brothers movie and Incredibles 2. I think it's going to be able to challenge both of them for the number 2 and number 1 spot. Slowly but surely, yeah, but it's definitely gonna be a very interesting race now. And on the worldwide side of things, it is the 5th biggest animated movie ever. It has knocked Minions out of the top 5 and sits behind Incredibles 2, Frozen, the Super Mario Brothers movie, and Frozen 2. Gonna be interesting to see if it can challenge those movies on the worldwide side of things. It just needs $200 million to surpass Frozen 2 for the all-time record. Gonna be interesting to see if it can get to those, how much more longevity it has. But still with the staying power and the strong word of mouth it has, there's a possibility it might do that. Again, it just faced off its biggest competitor and it's still put up a good fight. People still want to go check out this movie. It's the biggest movie of the year for a reason. It's the first film to surpass $500 million since Barbie from last year. Again, huge achievement if I do say so myself. Inside Out 2 just sped past all of the competitions. It's the biggest movie of the summer. It's the biggest movie of the year, and it's going to be interesting to see what other movies can challenge this. Maybe a certain Merc with the Mouth, but more on that later. But yeah, definitely going to be interesting to see which movies can even try to replicate the success this thing has. It's unlike anything we've seen in a while. So yes, while Inside Out 2's number 1 spot may have been stolen away, it is still a champion and a force to be reckoned with at the box office for sure. And finally, let's end the video off with the number 1 movie of the weekend, which was Despicable Me 4, opening with $75 million this weekend, and since it opened on Wednesday, it adds to a domestic total of $122 million and a worldwide total of $230 million. This is the 2nd biggest opening for an animated and family film this year, topping Kung Fu Panda 4, If, and the Garfield movie, but still sits behind Inside Out 2. It also sits behind Inside Out 2 as the 2nd biggest opening of the summer, where it also was able to top Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, Bad Boys Ride or Die, and A Quiet Place Day 1. It's the 4th biggest opening of the year overall, topping Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes once again, but still sitting behind Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, Dune Part 2 and Inside Out 2. It is the fourth biggest opening in the Despicable Me and Minions franchise, topping Despicable Me 3 and the first Despicable Me, but still sitting behind Despicable Me 2, Minions: The Rise of Gru, and the first Minions. And it is Illumination's sixth biggest opening ever, topping Despicable Me 3, The Lorax, The Grinch, and the first Despicable Me, but still sits behind Despicable Me 2, The Secret Life of Pets, Minions: The Rise of Gru, the first Minions, and the Super Mario Brothers. So once again, Despicable Me crushes on 4th of July weekend, as they typically do. You know, when it comes to like animated franchises that go on for over at least 3 movies, you'd see like a decline in like turnouts and enjoyment in these movies. You know, we saw that with Ice Age, the Lego movies. Even by this point, Shrek was facing a downturn, but no, Despicable Me is still remaining consistent, as you know, once again, people still love these movies. People still love Gru, the girls, Lucy, and of course those Minions. And with this being the new animated film of the summer, a lot of families wanted to go check it out. It's the new installment of Despicable Me as well, and you know, once again, people still love these movies. We saw that with Minions: The Rise of Gru, and we're seeing it again with this one. Hell, had this movie opened on the Friday as opposed to the Wednesday, it probably could have been the second $100 million opener, all things considered. But you know, it was 4th of July weekend, and obviously they wanted some of that 4th of July money, so I guess I understand that. And things are also off to a great start in terms of this movie's budget. It is the most expensive film in the franchise, but also it only costed $100 million, and it's already doubled that worldwide, and it's sure to continue to do so for the rest of the summer as it opens in more countries, for sure. As the word of mouth on this does seem to be great. It got an A Cinema Score rating, which is better than the A- that Despicable Me 3 got, and is on par with the rest of the Despicable Me Minions films. Hell, it's actually better than most of the animated movies that have come out this year, like Kung Fu Panda 4 and the Garfield movie. So word of mouth on this is positive. People are really enjoying this fourth, technically sixth installment in the franchise. And not only that, not only is this going to be the only family film in theaters until, of all things, Harold and the Purple Crayon in August, but it's also going to be the only animated movie in theaters until Transformers and the Wild Robot in September. So this movie's got pretty much the rest of the summer all to itself. You know, Inside Out 2 has already made all of its money, and you know, Despicable Me 4 is definitely going to make the most out of the lack of competition it has to face off against, you know, unless if, you know, Harold and the Purple Crayon becomes the next Inside Out 2. You never know. So yeah, a great start for Despicable Me 4, another solid win for the franchise. The future's looking very bright for this movie. I think we're going to see another solid performance and turnout for Gru and his minion. And those were your top 5 domestic box office results for this weekend, but we're not quite done yet, as we've got another week ahead of us and new movies hitting theaters. And this weekend we have one new major wide release, that film being Fly Me to the Moon, a new rom-com historical drama about the first mission to the moon, whether it was fake or actual. This movie is going to answer that, I guess. This is an interesting movie. It's definitely an outlier, certainly something we wouldn't expect during this time of the summer. Certainly something we would expect for this time of the summer would be like, you know, like a big action movie, another family film. But no, this is, like I said, a historical drama rom-com. It is also the second collaboration with Sony and Apple TV Plus after Napoleon last Thanksgiving. Definitely an interesting choice for the summer for sure, and I'm not sure if it's going to really pan out. I'm not sure if this is going to be the big hit that they're hoping it is. There are some positive factors here, you know, the star power of Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson. They're movie stars, and they've shown that they can really bring people to theaters. I also think the concept is intriguing enough. You know, the moon landing, whether it was fake or real, I think this movie is going to present those ideas. Could present those ideas in an interesting way that could drum up buzz. And you know, it's a rom-com. Those movies have been drumming up some business. Obviously, Anyone But You, but even stuff like The Lost City was able to bring some people in it. But the problem is, I'm not seeing a lot of marketing for this movie. I've seen a couple of promos and ads for it here and there, but not a lot to really say, yeah, this movie's everywhere. They're really getting the word out, and the buzz isn't also quite there. I don't see a lot of people talking about this movie, not seeing too much commotion about it or people even knowing it's coming out. So yeah, definitely a big wild card for sure this weekend. It's going to be interesting to see if this movie overperforms, maybe does another Anyone But You, maybe it doesn't have the best opening but really shines through its legs, or ultimately fumbles the bag and just really disappoints. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting weekend to see how this movie does for sure, but we'll see how well this movie truly does, as well as the rest of the movies that land in the top 5 on the next Box Office Chat. And that's going to do it for this week's episode of Box Office Chat. What did you all think of the result? Were you satisfied, unsatisfied? Comment down below and let me know. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you like this channel, hit the subscribe button. Follow me on all the social media links right there. And until next time, everyone, stay sharp.